Hey guys, tonight we are going to talk about the woman who perhaps taught the world how to deal with family tragedy and how to use it to dominate an empire. I'm talking about Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. She is living proof that you can be declared illegitimate by your father, be locked up in prison, yet still become the most badass queen in history. She essentially looked at the list of eager gentlemen proposing marriage and humorously replied, "I won't be sharing my crown with anyone, thank you." So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I am absolutely dying of curiosity to know where you guys are currently listening from. Is anyone getting ready to welcome the dawn in California? Or are you hearing this sleepy voice under the streetlights in New York? Please comment your location and the current local time. It is truly a wonder how our sleepy community stretches across all the time zones. Alright, find the spot that makes you want to drift off to sleep the most. Take a nice, deep, slow breath and let your body sink into that cozy mattress. We are about to travel back in time to the year 1533, an era where you had to face danger and very uncomfortable straw mattresses. Trust me, by the time we finish this journey, you will be incredibly grateful that you are not lying on a pile of dry straw. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Tonight, you will awaken at Greenwich Palace, England, in the year 1533, in a cradle lined with coarse linen, your hands still scented with candle wax and dry straw. Strange, isn't it? But let's slow down, take a deep breath, and drift together into the Tudor world. You are Princess Elizabeth, named after both of your grandmothers, a combination both comforting and weighty. Instead of the prince heir everyone hoped for, you became the firstborn daughter of Henry VIII and Queen Anne Boleyn. The moment your first cry rang out, the palace quaked with disappointment. King Henry openly declared his desire for a son, even daring to break from the Roman Church to marry your mother, and now all he had was you. Picture that scene. The scent of burning wood from the hearth, mingling with musty tapestries steeped in dampness, rushes strewn across the floor that could not mask the mildew. In the distance, the Thames lapped gently against stone walls like a hushed soundtrack. Horses' hooves clattered on the tiled courtyard, and boatmen's cries echoed through the still air. Everything felt romantic yet fraught with tension. Not yet 3 years old, you witnessed the Tudor court's dizzying rise and fall. After only 2.5 years, just as you learned to walk and talk, everything collapsed. Your mother, Anne Boleyn, was accused of adultery and treason, and on the 19th of May, 1536, she was beheaded at the Tower of London. That morning, you awoke a legitimate princess. That very night, you were deemed illegitimate. Henry VIII declared his marriage to your mother null and void, therefore. You were no longer his daughter in the eyes of the court. Your caretaker, Lady Margaret Bryan, was at a loss. She wondered, what should I dress the little one in? Should I still call her princess, or just little Elizabeth? The royal budget was slashed, the court downsized, and the sumptuous silk gowns and lavish toys slowly disappeared. In an instant, you lost the warm nights amid satin and ivory. As a result, you were removed from Greenwich to Hatfield House in Hertfordshire, a kind of royal exile for children. You might think royal exile sounds like a bad comedy, but for a 2-year-old, Hatfield quickly became the new normal. Warm red brick walls replaced gilded columns. Stained glass windows filtered gentle light instead of ornate mullions. And the vast garden let you run freely without stifling protocol. Hatfield opened a smaller, simpler world, yet fraught with uncertainty. Every morning, sunlight filtered through the leaves, you breathed fresh air and ran across dew-kissed meadows. In the afternoon, birdsong mingled with rustling leaves, lulling you into childhood dreams. And yet your royal status remained as fragile as a candle's flame before the wind. A single political storm could snuff it out. From Hatfield you began to realize power is not innate. It is like a crystal vase, beautiful and precious, yet astonishingly delicate. Every windblown whisper at the window, every hurried step on the wooden corridor reminded you of the unpredictable changes beyond. The 2-year-old, you learned to listen more, observe more, and slowly developed an instinct for self-preservation. That next night, while you drifted between Hatfield and its red brick walls, I invite you once more to take a deep breath, and let me tell you about the woman who gave you your name and paved the way for your destiny. Anne Boleyn, mother of Princess Elizabeth. Anne was born in the year 1483 into one of England's noble families. She grew up within the ancient brick walls of Hever Castle, learning the ceremonies of the French court and speaking French as naturally as breathing. Leaving home, Anne entered the service of Queen Catherine of Aragon in the year 1502, still not yet 20 years old, with a grace that attracted many suitors, including Henry Tudor, then just a prince. Imagine the scene. It is the year 1502, Greenwich Palace alive with candlelight and music, courtiers' laughter sparkling through the halls. Young Anne, enchanting and poised, dark brown eyes as deep as autumn chestnuts, captivated King Henry, by then Viscount Rochford, at first glance. But to win his heart, Anne had to wait in uncertainty. Henry VIII was still married to Catherine of Aragon and could not break from the Roman Church. Their love blossomed in stolen glances at the end of banquets, then grew into Europe's most consequential affair. By the year 1525, Henry threw off every barrier, determined to break with Rome to marry her. The process dragged on nearly a decade. Picture the tense hearings, the grandeur of petitions to the Vatican, and finally the hushed issuance of a papal decree on the 23rd of April 1525, formally authorizing the break. At last, on the 30th of May, 1526, 1 year after the split, Henry led Anne in triumph into Westminster Palace before hundreds of courtiers. The spectacle was glorious. Crimson silk robes, towering hennin headdresses, and the strings of lutes and viols ringing with joy. Anne was crowned Queen Anne Boleyn, the Boleyn name ascendant at last. Less than a year later, on the 7th of September, 1527, Queen Anne gave birth to you, Princess Elizabeth. The chamber glowed pink by candlelight, and cheers echoed through the palace. Joy, however, proved fleeting. 4 years on, in May 1531, Henry began to distance himself from Anne, and by the year 1536, she was accused of adultery with Thomas Cromwell, and George Boleyn charges most historians now regard as fabricated. Picture the 19th of May 1536. Hatfield's leaves still green, yet Hertfordshire's wind cut cold. The sentence of beheading echoed at the Tower of London before a hushed crowd. Anne's dark hair was braided beneath her cap, her cheeks still flushed like cherry blossoms, her eyes distant yet proud. Church bells tolled more somberly than ever, announcing the end not only of a life, but of the lot of women at court. That morning, you just 2.5 years old awoke without understanding politics' cruelty, only sensing that your mother's presence beside your cradle had vanished. Margaret Bryan swept you into her arms, hiding her tears as she whispered, "My princess, your mother has gone to heaven." From Hatfield, your world lost its first guide, a courageous woman of wit and strategy who steered her own fate. The memory of Anne Boleyn lingers like the last warmth of spring. She taught you that love can ignite wars, that power can yield before the dictates of the heart. Though she fell from political grace, her spirit lived on in your eyes each Hatfield night as you lit your candle, reminding you never to abandon ambition and pride. And now, as this chapter about Anne draws to a close, release your shoulders and let London's distant bell chimes lull you toward dreams. Let your mind be as serene as a falling cherry blossom petal. Our next segment will explore the lessons you carried from your mother and how we cherish each of those moments in your story. Now, back at Hatfield, your guardian was your half-sister Mary Tudor, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who, like you, had been declared illegitimate after Henry VIII's marital upheavals. Mary was 17 years older than you, born on the 18th of February 1516, and carried a lifelong grudge against your father, bitter over the downfall of her own mother. In the beginning, the relationship between the two lost princesses was tense. Mary aloof and proud, you overwhelmed by her cold disdain. Yet, little by little, she embraced her duty, tucking you in at night, choosing your dresses by day, and overseeing your earliest lessons with a reluctant but growing affection. From infancy, you displayed an uncanny knack for languages under the gentle guidance of your governess, Catherine Cat Ashley. A true linguistic prodigy, You soaked up French, Latin, and Italian, as eagerly as any child today might devour lullabies. By the time you turned 4, you could recite the Latin alphabet. By 6, you were reading classical Latin texts with ease. It was Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's sixth wife, whom he married on the 12th of July 1543, who recognized your brilliance and committed to educating you. The so-called illegitimate princess, on par with your younger brother Edward, born when you were 4. Edward, the son Henry had yearned for, swiftly became your closest companion and emotional anchor. The two of you, kindred spirits in scholarship, would sit beneath Hatfield's ancient oaks writing letters in Latin, finger the virginal's keys in unison, and chase each other through the dew-dappled gardens at dawn. Under the tutelage of the humanist scholar Roger Ascham, you even tackled Greek, translating Homer and Plato before many in the kingdom knew those names. By your 12th birthday, you had undertaken the monumental task of translating your stepmother's own religious treatise into Italian, Latin, and French as a New Year's gift for your father, proof of both your devotion and your linguistic mastery. Hatfield's daily rhythm was at once serene and rigorous. Mornings began with prayers in the little chapel, followed by lessons in grammar and rhetoric until the noon bells chimed. Afternoons invited leisurely strolls among clipped hedges, birdsong weaving through stately elms and oaks, your laughter echoing along the corridors as you dashed between lessons. Evenings were candlelit affairs. The sweet scent of beeswax candles mingled with the acrid tang of ink as you pored over manuscripts. In winter, the hearth fires crackled, sending tendrils of smoke that mingled with the scent of parchment and quill. All the while, beyond those red brick walls, England convulsed in religious turmoil. Monasteries fell at royal decree, the Bible was translated into English for laypeople's eyes, and souls were pitted against souls in the struggle for faith and often life itself. Yet within Hatfield's familiar embrace, you found a sanctuary to cultivate knowledge and forge resilience. The court's politics might label you an outlaw princess, but here you became Elizabeth, learner, translator, thinker, readying yourself for the stage that awaited beyond Hertfordshire's quiet lanes. So, as you nestle beneath your duvet tonight, let the gentle cadence of Hatfield's past carry you towards sleep. Recall Mary's cautious care, Cat Ashley's patient lessons, the whispered secrets of Greek lexicons, and Edward's trusting laughter. Though the world beyond Hatfield's gates raged and roared, here you found the foundation upon which you would build a reign defined by wit, wisdom, and unwavering calm. That summer, when you were 14 years old, Hatfield welcomed Thomas Seymour, brother-in-law to Jane Seymour, who had once doted on Prince Edward. He was nearly 40 years old, noble and powerful, and every time he got a little too close, you couldn't help feeling flustered. On several occasions, Thomas led you into a private chamber before you had finished, fastened your gown, teasing you with sly remarks that made your cheeks flush. You were 14, and he held royal authority in his hands, no wonder you trembled. Catherine Parr, the sixth wife of Henry VIII, could not remain silent. She had received reports from the royal physicians and the palace overseer. One afternoon, when Thomas appeared yet again, Catherine flew into a rage and ordered you sent immediately back to St. James's Palace. "I grant her independence in her studies and daily life," she declared, "but let her not forget to guard herself against the power of men." You regained a measure of freedom, but also learned a valuable lesson in the fragility of a princess's standing. Before you could settle, Hatfield was rocked by rumours that you were with child. Within the Tudor household, the whispers spread like wildfire. "Has the princess conceived?" Though you knew it was baseless slander, you understood instantly. A royal's reputation was so delicate that a single rumour could shatter a future. The Regency Council launched an urgent inquiry and uncovered that Thomas Seymour had plotted to abduct Prince Edward to seize power. In March of 1549, Thomas was arrested for treason, and on the 20th of March 1549, he was beheaded before the new palace gate at Bishopsgate. That horrifying spectacle forged within you a fierce instinct for self-protection and ceaseless vigilance toward those who wielded power. On the 28th of January 1547, your father Henry VIII died at Whitehall Palace at the age of 60. Prince Edward, born on the 12th of October 1537, was only 9 years old when he ascended the throne as Edward VI. The Regency Council assumed governance, and you became a silent observer. You moved from Hatfield back to St. James's to be near your brother, dedicating yourself to study, strengthening your resolve, and deftly avoiding the power struggles of the great nobles. But shortly after his accession, Edward fell gravely ill. The boy king whom your father had so desperately desired was now a frail 15-year-old, plagued by a relentless cough. In his final days, Edward issued his Devise for the Succession in early June 1553, naming Princess Jane Grey as regent for 9 days, to be followed by you. Yet Edward's decree lacked the force of law before his death. On the 6th of July 1553, Edward VI died at the age of 15. The Tudor realm was once again thrown into turmoil when Jane Grey, a 16-year-old princess, was proclaimed queen. You, the so-called illegitimate princess, were swept up once more in the deadly game of succession. Jane Grey held the throne from the 10th to the 19th of July, 1553, exactly 9 days before Mary Tudor, your half-sister, marched from East Anglia to London, deposed Jane on the 19th of July 1553, and restored her own rule. You, Elizabeth, now stood between Mary and Jane, fully aware of how precarious royal destiny could be. Tudor history taught you that the throne was no sanctuary, but a vortex of peril where every step must be measured. At 14, you had already endured temptation, false accusations, conspiracies, and the death of your brother Edward VI, only to learn once more how to survive the stormy seas of politics. With each passing day, you understood more deeply. Real strength lies not merely in a crown, but in wisdom, patience, and adaptability. From Hatfield to Street, James's, from Thomas Seymour's advances to Jane Grey's 9-day reign, you were more than an illegitimate princess, you were growing into Elizabeth I. Just 9 days after Jane Grey ascended the throne, loyalists to Mary Tudor rose in arms in East Anglia. You officially too neutral to take sides, feigned illness to avoid pledging for Jane or Mary. From your sickbed at Hatfield House, you tracked the unfolding drama. Jane Grey's regime collapsed. Mary's supporters rallied, and on Easter Sunday, 1553, Mary was proclaimed Queen Mary I. Almost at once, you recovered, appearing at court by Mary's side as a living emblem of Tudor unity. Yet behind the courteous smiles, suspicion festered between the half-sisters. Mary, fervently Catholic, glowed with triumph. You, reared in Protestant reform, internally recoiled at each chanted Latin Mass. The first weeks of Mary's reign crackled with tension. She calmly prepared her marriage to Philip II of Spain on July 25, 1553, then set about her restoration of the Catholic faith, burning nearly 3,000 heretics at Smithfield between February and December of 1555. London's skies filled with morning smoke. Every damp alley carried the acrid tang of funeral pyres. You kept a safe distance, mastering the art of saying a lot without revealing anything, of praising without pledging. When Mary's pregnancy rumours swept the court, she announced her joy at the news you played the devoted sister, offering quiet consolation when midwives confirmed it was a phantom pregnancy. You knelt at the right moments, crossed yourself with studied reverence, and adopted the wide-eyed demeanour of one seeking instruction, all to stay beneath Mary's watchful gaze. Then, in November 1558, Mary died quietly at St. James's Palace at the age of 42. Hearing the news at Hatfield, you felt the ground shift beneath you. Within hours, heralds proclaimed you, at 25 years old, as Queen Elizabeth I of England and Ireland. You inherited one of the most challenging crowns in history, an empty exchequer drained by Mary's costly foreign marriage and executions, a realm cleaved between Catholic zealots and Protestant reformers, and an administration weakened by suspicion and decay. Yet you were ready, or at least determined, to become what Catherine Parr had once called a queen of action. You rose from your Hatfield chambers, not as the innocent bystander of Easter, but as the realm's active steward. You summoned your Privy Council to Whitehall on December 1st, 1558, and set a tone of sober resolve. You spoke of mercy, moderation, and the need to bind up the nation's wounds, while secretly preparing the mechanisms of governance that would strengthen royal authority. In those first days, you dispatched William Cecil to Oxford and Cambridge to quell sectarian unrest and secure Protestant loyalty. You reopened the Royal Mint on January 10th, 1559, stabilizing the currency by recalling debased coinage. You summoned Parliament in January 1559 to enact the Acts of Supremacy and Uniformity, re-establishing the Church of England under royal leadership and mandating a single Book of Common Prayer in English. Slowly, deliberately, you wove a religious settlement that would bind your divided subjects without fanatical persecution. Above all, you embraced the mantle of active queen. You reorganized the Privy Council, promoting advisors who combined loyalty with administrative competence. Thomas Howard, the Earl of Nottingham, became Lord High Admiral on February 22nd, 1560. Francis Walsingham was appointed Principal Secretary on April 22nd, 1573. You entrusted Walsingham with building a network of intelligence that would detect conspiracies before they flared. Most strikingly, you shifted from the reactive neutrality of Hatfield to a proactive engagement with statecraft. You attended council meetings daily, read dispatches from your ambassadors in Madrid and Rome, and offered opinions on foreign policy. You negotiated a modest marriage treaty with the Prince of Sweden without committing to marriage himself, maintaining your Virgin Queen leverage while forging Protestant alliances. By the time spring blossomed into summer 1559, England watched its new queen not as a passive figurehead but as a sovereign in command. London's theatres resumed their plays, but now your face appeared on medallions and proclamations. Merchants imported silks from Italy again, confident in the stability you had imposed. Scholars returned to Oxford, where sermons in English once more echoed through stone cloisters. In that perilous transition from Mary to you, Elizabeth Tudor discovered the power of action over acquiescence. You transformed from the sheltered princess feigning sickness at Hatfield into the resolute monarch steering a kingdom through stormy religious seas. The treasury was empty, the realm divided, yet your first weeks of rule proved that Elizabeth I would not be content with passive existence. Instead, you embraced your role as an active queen, poised, prepared, and ready to lead Elizabethan England toward a new era of stability and Protestant ascendancy. On the eve of your procession to London, you knelt beneath the broad canopy of the Hatfield oak, listening to the autumn wind murmur of the destiny that awaited you. The date was the 26th of November, 1558, and dawn would soon carry you toward your first royal journey as England's monarch. At first light on November 27th, you mounted a white charger draped in velvet housings and set out down the muddy, rutted road. Cloaked in pristine white wool lined with ermine, you wore a gleaming gold crown upon your head and carried the scepter and orb symbols of sacred authority in gloved hands. As you passed, lines of courtiers knelt upon the cold earth, their voices rising in unison. Elizabeth I! Elizabeth I! The crisp November air bit at your cheeks, but your heart swelled with solemn pride. Your coronation in Westminster Abbey on the 11th of January, 1559, was as magnificent as it was nerve-wracking. 2,000 peers, bishops, and foreign ambassadors filled the ancient stone nave, their breaths visible in the frosty hush. Golden incense curled toward vaulted ceilings as you processed beneath the arches. Yet even amid the splendour, your mind raced. The Exchequer lay all but empty after Mary's religious campaigns. Scotland, allied with France, loomed to the north, and the Spanish navy, though battered, remained formidable across the Channel. That evening, at your coronation feast in the banqueting house at Whitehall, marriage proposals arrived like unbidden guests. Philip II of Spain, still nursing his loss, the young King of Sweden, Eric XIV, and the Archduke Charles of Austria, each dispatched envoys bearing ornate gifts and lavish dowry offers. You received each petitioner with a gracious nod, an inscrutable smile, but no promise. Deep down, you understood that marriage meant sharing your crown and your power. Rather than rush into alliance, you perfected the art of strategic indecision. You hinted at a Spanish marriage when you needed a fleet. You dangled a Swedish match to secure Protestant support. You flirted with Austria to keep France at bay. In each case, you whispered perhaps in ambassadors' ears, sending them back to their courts to clamour anew. Your chastity became your strongest diplomatic weapon. And then there was Robert Dudley, your childhood companion, sweet Robin, who slipped from friend to centre of court gossip. In 1560, Dudley presented you with Kenilworth Castle, lavishing you with entertainments, pageants and fireworks in a 3-week festival that cost him a fortune. But tragedy soon struck. In September of 1560, His wife Amy Robsart fell down the staircase at Cumnor Place and broke her neck. Though the coroner's inquest declared it an accident, scandal engulfed Dudley, and by extension, you. Yet you retained Dudley at court, carefully balancing affection with restraint, ensuring his presence fueled curiosity without endangering your reign. By the close of the 1560s, you had placated Parliament, secured your personal authority, and stabilized the realm's religious settlement. Your Elizabethan solution took shape. The Church of England under royal supremacy, outwardly conforming Catholics tolerated, and simple communion rites observed, abolishing excessive ritual. You gently guided worship toward moderation, preventing the violent persecutions that had scarred Mary's reign. At sea, you rebuilt the Royal Navy. Dockyards at Deptford and Chatham expanded, and new galleons, sleek, nimble, and armed with medium-caliber cannon, entered service. You commissioned daring privateers like Sir Francis Drake, authorizing raids on Spanish treasure ships in the Caribbean. Between 1560 and 1569, these ventures returned an estimated £200,000 in captured silver and gold, replenishing the exchequer and weakening Spain's grip on New World riches. Your diplomacy remained supple. When France eyed Flanders, you offered English ships to Dutch rebels. When Spain threatened reprisals, you reminded Philip of friendly intentions and welcomed his envoys. You negotiated trade treaties while ensuring no single power could dominate your foreign policy. In quiet council chambers, you wielded your reputation as the Virgin Queen, like a guileful knight's blade never committing, always keeping potential allies vying for your favor. Through those years, you demonstrated that true sovereignty lies not in marriage alliances, but in judicious statecraft. You proved a woman could rule without a husband, guiding England through religious upheaval and military threats by sheer intellect and diplomatic finesse. As November turned to December in 1569, you surveyed a nation at peace and a court that respected your unrivaled skill in balancing might and moderation. In 1567, your cousin Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, fled the dynastic turmoil of her homeland and arrived at your doorstep seeking sanctuary. Mary was 35 years old, born on December 8, 1537, and carried the regal bearing of a French court upbringing. Yet, when she crossed into England in May of 1567, she became nothing more than a guest under strict house arrest. To balance mercy with national security, you arranged for Mary to stay at a series of country estates: Bolton Castle in Yorkshire, Sheffield Manor Lodge in Derbyshire, and Chatsworth House, ostensibly for her health, but in reality to keep her under careful guard. Mary, however, did not remain silent. She secretly communicated with Catholic loyalists across England and Europe, dispatching covert letters sealed in wine casks, embedding messages in bookbindings, and encoding dispatches in cipher. By 1569, the Northern Earls' rebellion erupted in Yorkshire. Charles Neville, Earl of Westmoreland, and Thomas Percy, Earl of Northumberland, raised forces to free Mary, proclaiming her rightful Queen of England in exchange for a proposed marriage to Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk. Their plan aimed to restore Catholic rule by setting Mary on the English throne. But your spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had built a formidable intelligence network. Within weeks, every facet of the conspiracy was laid bare. On December 2, 1569, the Duke of Norfolk was arrested for treason. By February 1570, the rebellion was crushed. Neville fled overseas, and Percy was executed in York on November 16, 1570. You acted decisively, sending a clear message that no Catholic coup would find safe harbour on English soil, even one under the guise of family ties. When it came to Mary herself, you balanced clemency with resolve. You refused to countenance accidents befalling a fellow monarch, drawing an ethical line that spared your reputation while ensuring no future plots could leverage her presence. Nonetheless, Mary's fate hung like a sword above the court until the papal bull Regnans in Excelsis, issued by Pope Pius V on April 25, 1570, formally excommunicated you and absolved English Catholics of allegiance. Suddenly, every Catholic conspiracy bore the Pope's endorsement. In August 1571, the Babington plot struck at the heart of your rule. Young Anthony Babington led a scheme to assassinate you and liberate Mary to reign. Unbeknownst to the conspirators, Walsingham's agents were embedded at every turn, intercepting letters and breaking codes. A pivotal missive hidden in a beer barrel explicitly implicated Mary in consenting to Babington's plan. When the letter was decoded, it provided irrefutable proof of her direct involvement in treason. Confronted with evidence that Mary had sanctioned your murder, you faced intense pressure to eliminate her as a threat once and for all. Parliament petitioned for swift justice. Your council pressed for decisive action. And even moderate voices argued that mercy had become dangerous. Yet you hesitated, torn between compassion for your cousin and duty to your realm. For months you weighed the moral and political consequences, delaying the final step. Ultimately, on February 8th, 1587, with a heavy heart and trembling hand, you signed Mary's death warrant. The sentence was carried out at Fotheringhay Castle that same day. Mary, clad in red as a Catholic martyr, ascended the scaffold with dignity and faith, her final prayers echoing across the cold walls. As the axe fell, Europe took note. The English Queen had executed her own blood, ending any immediate Catholic rallying point on your throne. That act, your most bitter decision, sent shockwaves through Christendom. It secured your realm from further internal treachery, but at the cost of a royal conscience burdened by kinship and treachery. You emerged, however, more determined to safeguard your nation, having endured the most wrenching test of both mercy and power. And so, the Virgin Queen, who once sheltered a cousin, became the monarch who preserved her kingdom, stepping from the shadow of conspiracies into the full light of a reign defined by cautious strength and unwavering resolve. That summer, barely 8 weeks after Mary's execution, the mightiest empire in Europe struck back. Spain assembled its Armada of God to invade England, dethrone you, and restore Catholicism. 130 ships, 30,000 soldiers, and 1,500 guns mustered in Lisbon's harbour through the spring of 1588, their shipyards working day and night, prows sliding into the tide with creaking timbers and gunpowder in their holds. Reports of this colossal force crashed onto your desk in Whitehall, delivered by Sir Francis Walsingham's intelligence network. You stared at the dispatch, your heart pounding. This was the greatest threat your reign had yet faced. You moved swiftly to reinforce England's naval defences. Rather than match Spain galleon for galleon, you invested in smaller, faster vessels bristling with medium-caliber cannon capable of long-range broadsides. Dockyards at Deptford and Chatham expanded by royal decree in the spring of 1588, adding 20 new ships to the fleet. You drilled crews relentlessly in rapid reloads and precision gunnery. Your admirals Charles Howard, Lord Admiral of England, aboard the Ark Royal, Sir Francis Drake on the Revenge, and Sir John Hawkins on the Victory awaited your orders, each man a master of seamanship and daring. Your strategy was elegantly simple, never close to the Armada's massive guns in a static line of battle. Instead, use speed and maneuverability to strike swiftly at scattered targets, harassing their formation and preventing any landing on English shores. You issued the command on Friday, the 19th of July, 1588. Stations to stations, squadrons to squadrons, signal fires blazing from Cornwall to Devon. That night the hills glowed with beacon fires as English garrisons were alerted. The Armada was on the move. In the pre-dawn hour of Monday, the 7th of August, 1588, you authorized the use of fire ships, old vessels loaded with pitch, gunpowder, and tar set ablaze, and steered into the heart of the Spanish crescent at anchor off Calais. Under cover of darkness, 12 flame-rigged hulks drifted among the lumbering galleons. The Spaniards, taken by utter surprise, cut their cables in panic, scattering into the blackness as their comrades' masts lit the sky. Screams and shouted orders echoed across the dark water, setting the stage for dawn's reckoning. On August 8th, the day broke to reveal a fractured armada. 22 swift English warships surged forth from Dover, their battered but agile hulls cutting through the channel. From beyond the reach of Spain's heavy culverins, your captains unleashed thunderous broadsides. Smoke blanketed the battlefield like a druid's mist, and giant galleons, some weighing up to 2,000 tons, listed and sank under the relentless fire. Sailors, trapped on rolling decks, plunged into icy waves, their cries lost beneath the roar of English cannon. That night, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, commander of the Armada, gave the order to retreat. The Spanish fleet limped northward along the Scottish coast, battered by storms that smashed many vessels against the Hebrides' rocky shores. Survivors washed up on Irish beaches, where local clans hostile to both Spain and England captured or killed them. Of the original 130 ships, only about 60 returned to Spain. Approximately 15,000 men perished in what became the worst naval disaster in Spanish history. In the days that followed, you monitored every dispatch with fierce satisfaction tempered by relief. On August 20th, you addressed Parliament at Westminster, praising the valour and faith of our seamen and soldiers, and awarded medals to Howard, Drake, Hawkins and their crews. London erupted in celebration. Bonfires flickered on every hilltop, church bells pealed in thanksgiving, and the streets filled with joyous crowds. Merchant ships returned with Spanish treasure captured by privateers, filling the exchequer with much-needed silver and gold. Behind the triumph, you ensured the victory would have lasting impact. You ordered immediate repairs to damaged ships and the construction of another 15 galleons before winter's end. You commissioned new artillery designs for longer range and accuracy. You reinforced coastal fortifications along Kent's cliffs and Cornwall's coves, constructing blockhouses and signal towers whose beacons would light the coast for decades to come. Diplomatically, you seized the initiative. You opened talks with the Dutch Republic against Spanish dominion, promising naval aid to Protestant rebels in the Low Countries. You moderated your marriage negotiations, still dangling the possibility to keep French and Spanish courts in tension while making clear England's independence at sea was non-negotiable. And so, in the autumn of 1588, England emerged not merely victorious but transformed. The Channel, once Spain's highway for invasion, became your highway to the New World. Merchant companies, chartered by royal charter, prepared voyages to Virginia, the Caribbean, and beyond. Confident English galleons patrolled the Atlantic under your banner. On the 9th of August 1588, you achieved one of the most stirring moments of your reign. You rode into the camp at Tilbury to rally 20,000 English foot soldiers ready to defend the coast. Imagine the sight. You, clad in shining silver breastplate over a white velvet gown, astride a noble white horse. As you cantered between the ranks, you grasped outstretched hands, greeted each regiment with a nod and a smile, and reminded them that their queen's purity was not a weakness, but quite literally a weapon. Before that sea of helmets and pikes, you raised your voice and proclaimed, "Though I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." The soldiers roared their approval, the ground trembling beneath their cheers. The words echoed across campfires and tents, carried by riders into every English county. You had become more than monarch. You were the living embodiment of England's defiance. Back in London, word of your Tilbury speech spread like wildfire. Parliamentarians sent emissaries bearing congratulations. Londoners lit bonfires on every hill and across the riverbank, their flames painting the night sky orange and gold. In every parish, churches rang bells for thanksgiving. Services, cathedral, choirs raised voices in joyful hymns, offering prayers of gratitude for divine favour. That same day, you honoured your generals and admirals with the newly minted Medal of Deborah, the biblical judge Deborah who led Israel to triumph. Charles Howard, Francis Drake, John Hawkins, and their captains knelt before you as you fastened the silver medallions upon their doublets, symbolizing the unity of martial courage and righteous cause. The defeat of Spain's Armada of God did far more than safeguard your throne. It proved that England's naval doctrine built on speed, manoeuvre, and gunnery could outmatch the greatest fleet Europe had ever assembled. Your decision to invest in smaller, nimbler ships paid off, as did your choice to empower privateers like Drake to harass Spanish treasure convoys. Politically, the victory at Tilbury cemented your independent foreign policy. Neither France nor Spain could dictate terms by force. Diplomats from the continent arrived bearing offers of renewed alliance and trade, eager to secure favour with the sovereign who had bested the Armada. Merchants watched new shipping routes open safely, while the exchequer, bolstered by captured silver and increased customs duties, began to refill. Culturally, the triumph ignited a flowering of national pride. Poets and playwrights among them, Edmund Spenser and William Shakespeare, penned paeans to England's valour. In taverns and town squares, minstrels sang ballads of Blonde Godiva, Elizabeth, tamer of the invincible Spanish galleons, Artisans crafted commemorative plates depicting ships in crescent formation broken by English broadsides. You yourself understood that Tilbury was more than a battle. It was a cardinal turning point. From that day on, England would be known not as a minor isle but as a maritime power. Over the next decades, your naval reforms new dockyards at Chatham and Deptford. Gunnery schools at Woolwich laid the foundation for what would become the Royal Navy. By the end of your reign, England commanded the seas, establishing the trade routes and colonies that heralded a new age of exploration. Yet you never forgot the human cost. Each August commemoration you attended included prayers for the souls of the 15,000 Spanish soldiers who perished and the losses suffered on both sides. You sent funds to widows and orphans of English sailors, lost in the Channel storms that followed the Armada's retreat, showing mercy even as you celebrated victory. As the smoky haze of bonfires cleared and the cheers faded into memory, you returned to Whitehall with Kentish soil in your boots and Tilbury's courage in your veins. That night, as you lay down to rest, you might have felt the gentle rocking echo of waves against the shore reminding you that though peace reigned, your island would ever stand vigilant against threats from across the sea. After the thunder of the Armada's defeat in 1588, you pressed your advantage to secure England's future at sea and at home. First on the agenda was the Royal Navy's revival. You directed funds to expand your fleet by commissioning an additional 30 ships between 1588 and 1590 sleeker galleons, pinnaces and galleasses designed for speed and manoeuvrability. At the dockyards in Chatham and Deptford, slipways rang day and night as carpenters laid hull planks and riggers threaded hempen ropes. You ordered the adoption of improved bronze cannon with longer range, standardizing calibers across your ships so that gunners could swap ammunition without confusion. By the summer of 1590, English warships patrolled the Strait of Dover with renewed confidence, deterring any foreign armada from testing your defences again. Yet you did not wait for state sails alone. You encouraged private enterprise on the high seas. Sir Walter Raleigh, knighted on April 2024, 1588, sailed to Guiana and returned with gold dust. Sir John Hawkins, your seasoned vice admiral, organised privateering expeditions in the Caribbean during the early 1590s, capturing Spanish treasure fleets bound for Seville. Their plunder, an estimated £200,000 worth of silver and precious cargo by 1594, flooded the exchequer and fueled further naval construction. You winked at these sea dogs, knowing their daring raids struck Spain where she was weakest, her New World riches. Meanwhile, back in London, you tackled the kingdom's spiritual fissures with equal boldness. In April 1559, Parliament enacted the Acts of Supremacy and Uniformity, collectively known as your Religious Settlement of 1559. The Church of England was re-established under royal supremacy. Every church bell rung out the Queen's name as Supreme Governor. You mandated a single Book of Common Prayer in English, but you also allowed public celebration of Catholic rituals so long as they were subordinate to the Queen's authority and devoid of violence, as your ordinance declared. This delicate compromise preserved internal peace, drew foreign merchants who prized stability, and made English universities Oxford and Cambridge a haven for Protestant scholars across Europe. To safeguard your realm from shadowy threats, you then laid the foundations of a professional intelligence service. Sir Francis Walsingham, appointed your principal secretary on April 22nd, 1573, constructed a network of agents and codebreakers. From hidden posts in Paris to sympathizers in Rome, his spy masters intercepted correspondence, decrypted ciphers, and foiled plots before they could bloom. The Ridolfi plot of 1571, which had sought to marry Mary, Queen of Scots, to the Duke of Norfolk, was exposed and crushed. Years later, the Babington plot of 1586, an assassination scheme entwined with Mary's rescue, collapsed under Walsingham's surveillance, sealing Mary's fate. Through these victories, your court remained secure from Bremen to Rome. As your security and religious settlement held firm, England's cultural scene ignited into a golden blaze. Playhouses sprouted in London's lanes. William Shakespeare, born in April 1556, penned histories, comedies, and tragedies that gripped audiences at the Globe and Blackfriars. Edmund Spenser, his Fairy Queen, published in 1590, wove epic verse celebrating your virtues. Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, first performed in 1592, dazzled with its daring themes. In painting, Nicholas Hilliard's exquisite miniatures captured your likeness in pearls and jewels. Architects like Robert Smithson raised country houses Hardwick Hall and Longleat, showcasing Renaissance symmetry on English soil. Scientific inquiry also flourished. The astronomer Thomas Digges presented the Copernican model in English around 1588, expanding minds beyond earthbound certainties. You became the patron without rival. Your court a magnet for talent. Artists who might have served faraway Champagne or Florence now flocked to Whitehall's galleries. Scholars from Germany and Holland sought fellowships at your new Trinity College in Oxford, believing that England under your reign championed both faith and freedom. In 1594, you personally endowed the Royal Exchange in London, fostering trade that spread English cloth and coin to every corner of Europe. All this you accomplished without a husband at your side, a marvel in a world where queens were expected to marry. You wielded your virginity as deftly as any diplomat's seal, granting the promise of marriage when it served England's interests, then withholding it to keep foreign powers in eager suspense. By balancing the might of your ships, the subtlety of your settlement, the stealth of your spies, and the brilliance of your artists, you forged an England that was secure, prosperous, and culturally radiant. Entering the 1590s, your court faced a new challenge. Ruling so long, had Parliament murmuring about your succession. You had reigned since 1558 over 3 decades, and whispers grew louder. Yet whenever ambassadors pressed for a list of heirs, you smiled enigmatically and replied that such matters would be settled in God's good time. You kept your succession secret until the final moment, refusing to pin down any claim prematurely. Meanwhile, your romantic prospects remained a diplomatic tightrope. Philip II of Spain, still smarting from Armada's defeat, sent earnest envoys bearing lavish portraits and gold filigree caskets in early 1593. The young King Eric, the 14th of Sweden, dispatched his letters in the spring of 1596, praising your wisdom and purity. Archduke Charles of Austria proposed an alliance as early as July 1598, offering Habsburg support against Catholic plots. You entertained each petition with a gracious head tilt, peppering your answers with "perhaps" and "we shall see." In so doing, you transformed your virginity into a most potent bargaining chip. Suitors vied not merely for your hand but for your ear, hoping to sway policy at the moment of choice. Yet in your heart, you harboured a different hope, James VI of Scotland. Born on June 19, 1566 to your cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, and raised in the French court before returning to Scotland in 1561, James combined Protestant faith with a legitimate claim to the English throne. You received his letters with quiet favour, never promising, yet also never dismissing his carefully worded appeals. In your correspondence exchanged discreetly from Whitehall to Edinburgh, you commended his learning and piety, laying the groundwork for a peaceful union of crowns. As the new century dawned, your tireless years at the helm took a toll on your health. You had surpassed England's average life expectancy, barely 32 years for women in the 16th century, but you pressed on, meeting foreign ambassadors, distributing knighthoods, and addressing Parliament with unwavering eloquence. On March 1, 1599, you received the Spanish ambassador, donning your finest crimson gown, and greeting him with the same poise you had shown George Carew nearly 4 decades earlier. Your joints ached, and candles of the chapel seemed dimmer, yet you never let pain dim your regal bearing. By March of 1599, signs of fatigue appeared. Yet you still rode out to review the cavalry at Greenwich on May 22, 1599, assuring your officers that England's defences would remain vigilant as the watchful heart of the realm. That summer, you celebrated your 41st anniversary as Queen, an unheard-of milestone, and hosted a tournament at Whitehall, watching tilting knights from your raised dais, though you felt each bump of the horse's gait. But time spares no one. In March 1503, though we refer to it as March 1603, your strength waned noticeably. You missed several council meetings in mid-month, an occurrence that sent courtiers whispering. On the morning of March 24th, 1603, before 3 o'clock, you slipped quietly away in your armchair at Richmond Palace, wrapped in layers of velvet and satin, but no utterance remained. Your gentle passing marked the end of 44 years on the throne, longer than any English monarch since William the Conqueror's reign began in October 1066. Your death set into motion the succession you had so carefully avoided naming. James VI of Scotland, aged 36 and already King of Scots, received the crown as James I of England by proclamation on March 27, 1603. This peaceful transition fulfilled your unspoken plan, a union of the English and Scottish crowns under a Protestant ruler, educated in your own religious settlement. As historian Edward Phillips would later write in 1674, your reign left a legacy secure in four great pillars: naval supremacy born of Armada's defeat, a religious settlement that balanced faith with tolerance, an intelligence network that safeguarded the realm, and a cultural renaissance unmatched in Europe. England rose from an island nation into a global power, trading silk, furs, and ideas across oceans you once patrolled. The arts you patronized, from Shakespeare's Tempest in 1594 to Marlowe's last play in 1513, endured for centuries. Called Elizabethan by contemporaries and the Golden Age, by posterity, your era established patterns of government, culture, and commerce that shaped modern Britain. You proved that a woman unmarried, unswayed by matrimonial pressure, could rule directly and wisely, wielding both compassion and firmness. And so, with her final breath taken quietly in the early morning of March 24, 1603, Elizabeth I drew to a close 44 years of glorious and storm-tossed reign. Whitehall lay hushed in the mist of dawn as the crown slipped from her hands to herald a new chapter for England. The sun rose over London's skyline, unveiling a destiny at once familiar and strange, carrying the kingdom from the Tudor throne into the Stuart era, where every trial, every political upheaval, and every breakthrough would continue the grand narrative of the realm shrouded in mist. On the 27th of March, 1603, as mist still clung to the rooftops of Whitehall, the trumpets sounded the proclamation: James VI of Scotland was now officially James I of England. In that instant, a Tudor crown slipped from Elizabeth's empty throne to rest upon the head of a king of two realms, Scotland and England, with the hope of forging a more powerful union than ever before. James was born on the 19th of June, 1566, and had sat upon Scotland's throne since he was but 1 year old, following the deposition of his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, at 36 years of age, he stepped into a new world: the English court with its grand palaces, the privy councils that had quarrelled in the absence of a clear sovereign. He arrived in London not with swaggering triumph, but with cautious curiosity, each footstep along Whitehall's pavements testing the pulse of a realm nearly 2 centuries in the making. The Anglo-Scottish union under James I was a personal union, a personal marriage of crowns rather than the creation of a single parliament. One crown was worn by one monarch, but 2 legislative bodies remained distinct: Westminster in England and Holyrood in Scotland. James grasped the advantage of this arrangement. He held all legislative authority in name, yet he dared not tamper with the traditions and customs of either land. This approach averted legislative clashes at the outset but sowed seeds of latent tension. In England, some members of Parliament were suspicious. Would the Scottish king favour his old realm or treat his new subjects impartially? In Scotland, noble lords feared that England's might would overshadow native policy and reduce Edinburgh to a mere satellite. Every path to the Privy Council teemed with questions and doubts. Of course, James could not sit idly by. 2 weeks after his accession, he hosted a banquet at the banqueting house, inviting intellectuals and commanders from both kingdoms for afternoon tea. He spoke gently. "I come not to divide, but to unite. Not to conquer, but to heal." His words were warm, though suspicions lingered. As James toured London and Westminster, he began formal dialogue with the English Parliament. On the 13th of April 1603, he delivered the royal speech at the opening session, urging the nation to cast off old prejudices and usher in an era of one crown, 2 realms, 1 people. Many MPs applauded, albeit some hesitantly. Letters of expectation from Edinburgh flooded Whitehall, beseeching James not to forget his roots. He answered each missive, praising the brotherhood between English and Scots, while carefully emphasizing the laws and customs of each land. The process of unifying authority did not proceed smoothly. In 1604, when James issued letters patent granting Englishmen shares in the eastern Scottish coal ventures, many English lords bristled. Why should England's resources flow to a far-off land? The king was forced to explain that economic cooperation would yield mutual prosperity. To reassure both sides, James established the Anglo-Scottish Economic Commission, composed of representatives from each realm, alternating its seat between London and Edinburgh. In subsequent years, the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood likewise invited English delegates to consult. Scottish MPs, initially wary, experienced a newfound respect when James stressed, "Scotland's laws shall remain Scotland's laws, its stream unaltered." He issued a charter exempting 6 Highland peers from land taxes in exchange for their pledge not to bring armed forces into England. This policy both preserved long-standing loyalties and paved the way for future military cooperation. The personal union continued to be tested through diplomatic engagements. In 1606, James negotiated with the King of Denmark to secure sea lanes to the port of Leith, enabling English and Scottish ships to protect North Sea fisheries together. This agreement fostered genuine collaboration rather than mere central control. Yet James did not neglect culture. He invited Scottish poets and musicians to his accession festivities, hosting lavish entertainments at the Palace of Holyrood House to demonstrate that the union was not only political, but also a shared cultural identity. Consequently, the Green of Scotland slipped into London streets, tartan flags appeared at Covent Garden fairs, and sealed dances charmed English courtiers. Over the years, the personal union became familiar. Although the parliaments of both countries continued to meet separately, James skillfully coordinated joint foreign and security policies. In 1610, amid renewed fears of Catholic plots, he convened a joint privy council with MPs from both realms to share intelligence. They agreed to train joint naval and land forces along both shores of the Channel, reinforcing an Anglo-Scottish fleet to protect the Bothnian Sea and the Strait of Dover. What began as a precarious personal union evolved into a firm foundation for deeper unity. James, nominally king of 2 kingdoms, in practice laid the groundwork for a true union, an historical progression we will further explore in the chapters to come. As night fell over both Whitehall and Holyrood, the skeleton of the personal union stood firm, ready to greet the dawn of a new era for the British Isles. Thus the personal union had been firmly established, but James I's first challenge was far from glamorous. It was a painfully empty treasury. You see, the war against the Armada of God in 1588 had cost several £100,000, a staggering sum at the time, enough to pay for 20 small squadrons and 300 gunners patrolling the Strait of Dover. Loans poured in from the banks of Venice and Amsterdam, only to quickly evaporate in shipbuilding costs at Chatham and Deptford and compensation for privateers like Drake and Hawkins. The funds remaining after victory were insufficient to cover the damage the customs revenues had fallen due to trade disruptions, forcing the Crown to print more currency, which in turn caused rampant inflation in food prices. Rice, flour, and rooster meat all rose by 3/4 compared to the previous decade, placing immense strain on the royal purse. James, invoking his royal prerogative, wished to spend freely without Parliament's interference, but the English Parliament nobles representing the people would not sit idly by when they heard that the king had issued an additional 60,000 gold bonds without parliamentary approval. They accused James of reckless extravagance, breaking the long-standing bargain between the throne and the taxpayers. In June of 1604, when James summoned Parliament, the atmosphere was taut as a drawn bowstring. Sir Edward Coke rose to question him bluntly. "Your Majesty bestows riches on foreign gentlemen while English lands lie fallow." The chamber erupted, some applauded, others glared at the royal bench. James, his face calm, but his eyes flashing with indignation, replied, "The royal prerogative is granted by divine right. None may bind it while I bear the responsibility of safeguarding the realm." He repeated the words, "regal prerogative," almost as a mantra. The king wields power to grant or rescind, regardless of debate. Tension simmered through the autumn of 1605, when James created Admiral Sir William Monson to collect trade taxes at the Port of London, without a parliamentary act. This move infuriated many MPs, some of whom demanded impeachment for usurping the rights of the people. Fortunately, James managed to defuse the crisis by promising to replenish the treasury only after securing overseas concessions, a clever debt trap that bought him time. Nonetheless, the question of king versus parliament was now indelibly marked. Amid these fierce verbal clashes, the spectre of old conspiracies lurked still. Less than 2 years later, On the 5th of November, 1605, the gunpowder plot exploded. Guy Fawkes and his co-conspirators had stored 500 pounds of gunpowder beneath the House of Lords, intending to blow up both the King and Parliament in a single night during James's reading of the royal speech to open the session. At 12 o'clock noon, the fuse sputtered, and watchful officers spotted Guy Fawkes wearing a tricorn hat guarding half a ton of explosives. The scandal rocked the nation. The 5 principal plotters were arrested, interrogated and executed on the 30th of January 1606, shortly after James issued the Prevention of Disloyalty Act. In an emergency session, Parliament gave the King a standing ovation for his resolve, and granted him additional powers to oversee churches and levy emergency taxes to bolster security. Though the gunpowder plot failed, it laid bare the rift between the Crown and extremist Catholic factions. James immediately issued his "Silence shall be the Commonwealth" decree, ordering preachers to cease attacking the royal government and calling the nation to unite against terrorism. This pacified some sentiments, but also drove moderate Catholics into retreat, fearing collective punishment. Looking back on the early 1600 decade, James I had weathered 2 storms. First, a nearly bankrupt treasury from naval expenses and colossal loans. Second, the sinister threat of the gunpowder plot. Through it all, he affirmed the throne's dual obligation to respect the will of the people via Parliament, yet to uphold royal prerogative in defence of the nation. Though the road remained uneven, James demonstrated that, in a united monarchy where English and Scottish traditions met skillful financial politics and unwavering resolve in the face of sabotage, would shape the kingdom's destiny for centuries to come. Continuing the Elizabethan spirit under your Stuart rule, the performing arts and sciences flourished in ways both familiar and new. The Globe Theatre still thronged with patrons, yet the stage itself evolved to reflect the shifting tastes of James's reign. William Shakespeare, now in the late phase of his career, penned plays infused with darker themes and complex theology. In 1603, Othello first appeared, exploring jealousy and otherness. By 1606, King Lear confronted the ravages of power and familial betrayal. Audiences gasped as the Moor's plight and the aging king's madness played out beneath the open sky, the same roofless amphitheatre that had cheered A Midsummer Night's Dream in Elizabeth's time. Ben Jonson, your poet laureate since 1599, continued to delight with crisp comedies of manners. His Volpone, first performed in 1606, skewered greed with biting wit as crafty characters feigned affliction to swindle a gullible benefactor. Meanwhile, John Donne, once Dean of Street, Paul's and celebrated preacher, published his Holy Sonnets in 1610, offering metaphysical reflections on mortality that whispered through candlelit drawing rooms. His line, "Death be not proud," resonated in chapels from Westminster to York Minster, reminding the faithful that even kings and queens answer to a higher authority. While the stage thrived, the realm of letters also welcomed Italian scholar John Florio's The King's Book in 1603, a bilingual anthology of Italian tales, proverbs and dialogues dedicated to James. As the first major English-Italian phrasebook, it opened continental culture to English readers, teaching phrases like "la vita è sogno" and enriching the lexicon used by playwrights and courtiers alike. In the field of natural philosophy, informal gatherings of learned gentlemen began meeting in London, coffee houses and private lodgings precursors to the Royal Society that would be chartered under Charles II. From 1605 onward, these coteries included astronomers, physicians, and experimentalists, exchanging letters and specimens. They discussed Galileo's telescopic discoveries despite Vatican censure, and debated Thomas Harriot's star charts of the moon, published in 1609. Though not yet formally institutionalized, this network laid the groundwork for England's scientific revolution. Architecture and music also rode this wave of innovation. Composer William Byrd, who had served at Elizabeth's court, published his final collections, Gradualia, in 1605 masses and motets, setting Latin texts to intricate polyphony. At James's coronation in March 1603, Byrd's choirs filled Westminster Abbey with soaring harmonies that seemed to bridge medieval solemnity and Renaissance elegance. On the architectural front, Inigo Jones returned from Italy in 1615 with sketches of Palladian villas and classical orders. Commissioned to design the Queen's House at Greenwich for your wife Anne of Denmark, he introduced pure proportion and symmetry to English brickwork. Completed in 16024, the Queen's House stood as England's first true Renaissance building, a genteel cube of white stone, its central hall flooded with light from a coffered ceiling above. Courtiers marvelled at its porticoed facade, whispering that James's dual role as king of two realms had found expression in this balanced, harmonious structure. By 16019, Jones's work at the banqueting house on Whitehall Palace erected a grand hall for masques and performances. Its ceiling, painted by Peter Paul Rubens in 1629, depicted the apotheosis of James, angels parting clouds to reveal the Stuart laurel wreath. Nobles gathered beneath this splendour for court entertainments, as masques written by Ben Jonson and designed by Jones himself wove mythological allegory with political flattery. Elsewhere, the Stage Door Tavern, established in 1607 near Drury Lane, became a hub where playwrights and musicians, Richard Burbage among them, debated the latest plot twists and harmonic innovations late into the night. Trade in printed music soared after Thomas Myriel published Musica Transalpina in 1597, introducing Italian madrigals to English consorts. By the 20-teens, audiences danced to the madrigal's bittersweet harmonies in country houses from Kent to Durham. Through all this activity, James I played the role of patron and participant. He met with scholars like Samuel Purchas, who in 16010 published Hakluytus Posthumus, continuing Richard Hakluyt's travel narratives. He conversed with artists and architects, admired Rubens's sketches, and even attempted to learn the lute himself. In his letters he described the thrill of witnessing Harriet's sunspots through a camera obscura in 16015, marvelling at God's handiwork. By the end of the 15-teens, England's cultural landscape had transformed. Theatres from the Globe to the newly built Blackfriars hosted not only Shakespearean tragedies, but also court masques, rich in Italianate stagecraft. Choir stalls in cathedrals rang with the intricate counterpoint of Byrd and Tallis, while sun-dappled gardens of Palladian villas hosted private recitals of lute and virginal. In under 2 decades, the Stuart court achieved what seemed impossible: a seamless continuation of Elizabethan genius, blended with fresh continental influences. Science, architecture, music, and theatre interwove in a dynamic tapestry that defined a generation. And though James's political and financial trials had tested him, in the realm of the arts he stood unchallenged as England's first scholar king. And now, as the Stuart court's lantern of culture still flickers in the midnight air, another fire kindles, one that stretches across the ocean to the shores of the New World. In May 1507, the Virginia Company's colonists founded Jamestown on the banks of the James River. These first settlers weren't all aristocrats hunting gold. Among them were groups inspired by the separatists, later to be called the Pilgrims, who dreamed of worshipping without interference. Though they didn't settle at Jamestown itself, their ideals soon drifted across the Atlantic. Jamestown's struggles were legendary. Starvation, the starving time, in the winter of 1509 to 1510, when only 60 of 500 colonists survived. Yet the idea took root. In September 1517, a group of separatists departed Leiden for the Virginia coast, only to be blown off course, and found themselves at Plymouth in November 1520. Their Mayflower Compact of 21st November 1520 was a pact of self-governance under God's law, an early echo of the dissenting spirit back in England. Meanwhile, on the home front, James I's Church of England faced increasing pressure from Puritans and dissenters who sought further purification. The term Puritan itself had become common by 1593, denoting those who wanted to purge the Anglican liturgy of any Catholic residue. Assemblies of classes began meeting in private homes: Hutchinson's gatherings in Norwich, Cotton's group in Boston, Lincolnshire sharing sermons, debating predestination, and drafting petitions for a Presbyterian model of church government. By 1607, the Hampton Court Conference of January had failed to meet Puritan demands, though it produced the King James Bible released in 15014, a magnificent translation that aimed to unify worship. Yet for many Puritans, the new translation only highlighted the need for deeper reforms. Ornate vestments, the Book of Common Prayer's set liturgy, and bishops' courts still reminded them of the old hierarchy. Dissenters, Congregationalists, Baptists, and Quakers took the movement further. In 1618, John Smith baptized himself and others at Gainsborough, founding the First Baptist congregation. The following year, Dutch and English Anabaptists in London formed the first separatist church there. By 1621, George Fox was preaching ideas that would birth the Quaker movement, emphasizing an inner light and rejecting formal sacraments altogether. These sects rarely remained hidden. In July 1615, the Council of High Commission fined and imprisoned Puritan ministers who refused to wear surplices. Between 1620 and 1625, some were driven into exile in the Netherlands, while others continued preaching in barns and taverns under the threat of the Star Chamber's wrath. The tension between church authority and private conscience grew sharper with each raid on a conventicle. Members of Parliament, too, felt the pressure. Richard Sibbs, MP for Suffolk, argued in Parliament's debates of February 1618 that the true peace of the realm lies in a church fitting for all. Yet hardliners resisted, insisting on episcopal authority. When the House of Commons presented the Proposals for the Advancement of True Religion in March 1620, urging Presbyterian governance, the Lords blocked it. King James, ever the political theologian, retorted that there was no single bishop in all the Scripture, but also warned against tinkering too far with tradition. The clash peaked in 1625 when the Puritan petition against Arminian clergy reached the king. Words flew like cannon shot. Parliamentarians decried rising popery under Archbishop Laud, while royal chaplains warned of anarchy if clergy power was curtailed. In private, James lamented that God has made me a king that I may feel the burden of quarrels both of state and of conscience. By the late 1620s, a quiet exodus began. Thousands of Puritans sailed for New England aboard the Winthrop fleet in March 1630, settling Massachusetts Bay. They left behind locked pulpits and surveillance by local magistrates, seeking a city upon a hill. Their departure both relieved and alarmed the crown. Relieved because dissenting voices in Parliament thinned, alarmed because the model colony might inspire more domestic nonconformity. Back in England, the wave of dissent forced a grudging tolerance. Though the Marriage Act of March 1623 upheld the Book of Common Prayer, justices of the peace were told to overlook minor breaches if they did not disturb the peace of the church. Some Anglican bishops quietly admitted that a little leeway might preserve unity better than harsh prosecution. So, beneath James's royal mantle, England witnessed the growth of a robust dissenting tradition. From Jamestown's rocky start to the Plymouth Separatists' compact, from clandestine conventicles to parliamentary petitions, the ripple of Reformation energy swept through both sides of the Atlantic. In just over 2 decades, what began as baptized whispers in village churches became transatlantic currents of conviction, shaping not only England's religious landscape, but the very notion of conscience and self-governance. And so, as the candle flickers low on our tale of Stuart England, let's settle in for the final chapter. The long shadow cast by Elizabeth's reign and how her golden legacy blossomed under the Stuarts. First, the Navy. Remember the ragged squadrons that fought the Spanish Armada in 1588? Under James I, those ad hoc fleets became the Royal Navy in 1605, when the Admiralty and Navy Board were formally established. 22 ships then fell under centralised command galleons, pinnaces, and the sturdy flagship Prince Royal, marking the birth of a professional naval service. By 1620, the Navy numbered 50 vessels, manned by some 20,000 sailors and marines. These bluejackets and tarpaulin-capped seamen would carry England's power across the seas for centuries, a direct heir to the privateers you once cheered. Next, Empire. From the rocky shores of Jamestown in 1507 to the far-flung factories of the East India Company in 1660, the Stuart monarchs presided over an ever-expanding colonial network. In 1608, the Virginia Company received a renewed charter, and by 1623, its settlers had founded 4 plantations along the Chesapeake. Meanwhile, in November 1609, the East India Company's ships first reached Bantam in Java, trading cloth for spices. By 1623, the company boasted 11 ships, 24 factors, and a chartered monopoly on trade from the Cape of Good Hope to the Straits of Magellan. It may have started as a handful of merchants, but under royal protection and armed with 36 cannon-armed vessels, it became the engine of Britain's Asian empire. Yet empire without ideas is a hollow hull. Elizabeth's golden legacy shimmered in education, law, and literature, and the Stuarts polished that legacy to a high sheen. In 1602, King James's Great Bible, authorized in 1514, gave way to the King James Version's second edition, propelling literacy across the realm. Grammar schools multiplied. By 1615, over 800 had been founded since Elizabeth's Charter of 1572, teaching 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic alongside rhetoric and classical languages. Universities at Oxford and Cambridge grew too, their colleges sponsoring chairs in medicine and mathematics. In 1621, Isaac Barrow lectured on Euclid, while at Cambridge another student, Sir Isaac Newton, was born in December 1542, destined to transform our understanding of gravity. Law, too, matured. Under Elizabeth, common law courts had reasserted royal justice. James's reign saw the first codified statute on property law in 1606, clarifying inheritance rights and reinforcing the rule of law. The Court of King's Bench evolved into a full chancery in 1615, dispensing equitable remedies for those the strict common law failed. Petite juries swore oaths, according to the Oaths Act of 1609, binding citizens to speak truth, and reducing perjured testimony in both civil and criminal trials. The idea that even the monarch was under law, a principle whispered by Coke and Bacon, became bedrock. No crown could seize land or liberty without due process. Exploring literature, we find that Elizabeth's stagecraft laid the track, and the Stuarts sent the locomotive thundering forward. Playwrights like Shakespeare completed their canon under James. Jacobean drama burst with darker plots: Macbeth in 15011, The Tempest in 15011, Cymbeline in 15015, each weaving magic, betrayal, and forgiveness. Meanwhile, Ben Jonson's masks dazzled with Inigo Jones's sets, and poets like John Donne and George Herbert wrote metaphysical verses in 1610 and 1631 respectively, probing the soul's mysteries. Their lines still echo in anthologies today, testament to an age when words shaped minds as powerfully as fleets crossed oceans. Finally, the spirit of freedom. Under Elizabeth, subjects had learned to breathe a bit easier. An English church that tolerated barb upon prayer and hymnal verse in the vernacular. Under James and Charles, that ethos expanded. In 1621, the Scrooby separatists penned the Mayflower Compact, asserting self-government in Plymouth. Across the Isles, elected boroughs sent representatives to Westminster, debating taxes and royal edicts, so that by 1630 the Parliament sat with a confident voice. The early seeds of the English Civil War were sown in tensions between Crown and Commons, but through that crucible emerged a clearer notion. Government derives from consent, not divine right alone. So as we dim the studio lights on this chapter, remember that the Stuarts did more than inherit crowns. They nurtured, sometimes begrudgingly, often boldly, a heritage of naval might, colonial ambition, scholarly rigour, legal order, and literary brilliance. They took Elizabeth's golden legacy and polished it under the fires of new challenges, forging a Britain that could look the world in the eye. Now, as the waves of history have finally quieted, and the last candles in the Stuart castle gutter out, let us take a deep breath to close this journey spanning several centuries. Imagine yourself standing atop a verdant hill, the breeze gently caressing your face, clouds drifting lazily before your eyes, and the sunset bathing the sky in golden light. All conflicts, intrigues, and grand victories have receded into the past, making room for a profound stillness within. The story of Elizabeth I, James I, and the courtly battles they waged has taught us the power of knowledge, the love of freedom, and the unyielding will to persevere. From the Tudor crown to the Stuart Union, from the naval storms to the triumphant heights of culture and science, each chapter reminds us that true power lies not only in a crown or a sword, but in our capacity to adapt, to create, and to connect with one another. Now, in this tranquil space, the stone columns of Westminster and the red roofs of Hatfield fade like mist. We hear the final strains of the Tudor orchestra, the echo of Stuart philosophers' footsteps, and then only our own heartbeat pulsing steadily. All worries about tomorrow, every lingering trace of history's long voyage, dissolves on the breeze. Let the soft moonlight illuminate the path before you, guiding you into a deep sleep. Each long exhale carries a memory of courage, wisdom, and the solidarity of those who made history. Close your eyes, and you will see a sea of sparkling stars, reminding you that no matter how vast the world may be, each small star contributes to the brilliance of the night. This tale carries a message about the value of knowledge and perseverance, about freedom and compassion. It shows us that, even when faced with danger and intrigue, humanity can choose the path of light by honoring the past, learning from mistakes, and forging connections to build the future. That is the undying legacy that Elizabeth and the Stuart kings bequeathed to posterity. And now, before sleep carries you into your dreams, I whisper gently, sleep well, knowing that our historical adventures will await us again one day soon. Don't forget to subscribe so I can continue to accompany you with the newest and most captivating videos. Rest easy, and I'll see you again in Starfield Dreams.